In October 2005, police in Henan Province, China, uncovered a chilling spree killing that left 3 people dead in a single afternoon. The killer did not run. Instead, he waited for the handcuffs with an eerie smile, believing his brutal actions had made him a righteous hero. But what drives a man to slaughter his own family and neighbors in cold blood? Before we descend into this dark investigation, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into criminal psychology. At approximately 5 p.m. on October 25, 2005, the dispatch center in Luoyang City, Henan Province, received a frantic emergency call. The voice on the other end was trembling, breathless with panic. The caller identified herself as Zhang Chunliang, a 40-year-old resident of the quiet, rural village of Yonglin. Her report was simple, yet horrifying. She had just returned home to find her husband, 43-year-old Yan Tianfeng, slaughtered in their living room. When homicide detectives arrived at the address, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, grim shadows over the village. The scene inside the house was visceral. In the center of the living room, suspended on a hammock, lay the lifeless body of Yan Tianfeng. He had not just been killed, he had been butchered. The victim was soaked in blood. The hammock itself was saturated, dripping a crimson pool onto the cement floor beneath. Preliminary observations revealed that blood was still oozing from massive wounds in his abdomen, suggesting the attack had happened recently. The scent of iron and visceral matter hung heavy in the unventilated room. Forensic pathologists arrived shortly after to secure the scene and examine the body. Their initial assessment placed the time of death between 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. that same day. The cause of death was immediately apparent: severe hemorrhagic shock caused by 3 deep, penetrating stab wounds concentrated in the abdominal region. Based on the shape and depth of the incisions, investigators concluded the murder weapon was a sharp, single-edged blade, likely a dagger or switchblade. Yan Tianfeng was dressed in a thin t-shirt and shorts, attire consistent with lounging at home on a warm afternoon. His wife, Zhang Chunliang, confirmed that this was what he usually wore to sleep. The lack of defensive wounds on his hands and arms painted a disturbing picture. Yan had likely been attacked while he was fast asleep on the hammock. He had died in his dreams, defenseless, never even seeing the face of his killer. Investigators noted high-velocity blood spatter on the wall adjacent to the hammock, indicating the ferocity and speed of the stabs. The killer had struck with intense rage, but also with surgical precision. A thorough sweep of the property deepened the mystery. There were no signs of a struggle, and no signs of forced entry. The windows and doors remained intact. Inside, nothing appeared to be missing. Yan Tianfeng was wearing a watch, which was still on his wrist, and other valuables in the house were untouched. This immediately ruled out a robbery gone wrong. This was a targeted execution. The absence of forced entry suggested the killer was either someone Yan knew and had let in, or someone who knew the house well enough to enter while the door was unlocked. Given the rural setting, where neighbors often leave doors unlatched during the day, the latter was a strong possibility. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, hoping for a witness. However, the timeline worked against them. The murder occurred during the early afternoon, a time when most villagers were either taking a nap or working deep in the fields. No one had seen any strangers lurking around the Yan residence. No one had heard a scream. Inside the house, crime scene technicians found a chaotic array of footprints on the cement floor. Unfortunately, the surface was dusty, and the prints were smudged and overlapping. These marks likely belonged to curious neighbors who had rushed in to see the commotion before the police arrived, contaminating potential evidence. It was a dead end. Detectives turned their focus to the grieving widow, Zhang Chunliang. During her initial interview, she provided a crucial detail about her husband's habits. She explained that Yan was a careless man. When he took his afternoon naps or stayed home alone, he often left the front door wide open, to let the breeze in. This reinforced the theory that the killer had simply walked in, seen Yan sleeping, and seized the opportunity. With physical evidence lacking, the investigation shifted to motive. Who wanted Yan Tianfeng dead? Detectives began digging into the victim's background, interviewing friends, family, and villagers. The portrait of Yan Tianfeng that emerged was not particularly flattering. He was unemployed, surviving entirely on a substantial inheritance left by his parents. He was described as social but idle, a man who spent his days drinking with friends or gambling in the city's entertainment districts. However, the most disturbing intel came from the neighbors regarding Yan's marriage. According to local gossip, the relationship between Yan and Zhang Chunliang was volatile. They fought constantly, mostly about money and children. Zhang Chunliang frequently complained that her husband was a parasite, burning through his parents' legacy with no ambition to earn a living. She feared that no matter how large the inheritance was, his gambling and drinking would eventually leave them destitute. Yan, who had a short fuse, did not take this nagging well. Neighbors reported frequent domestic violence. Yan would beat his wife when she complained. He was so aggressive that he had even attacked neighbors who tried to intervene in their arguments. In one particularly brutal incident, Yan had beaten Zhang Chunliang with a wooden club, splitting her scalp open and sending her to the hospital. This history of abuse shifted the detective's gaze toward the widow. Was it possible that Zhang Chunliang, pushed to the breaking point after years of beatings and financial anxiety, had finally snapped? The theory was plausible. She waits for him to fall asleep, stabs him, and then leaves the house to create an alibi, calling the police later to play the grieving wife. Police decided to scrutinize Zhang Chunliang's timeline. In her initial statement, she claimed that she had left the house early that morning to work as a hired hand in the fields of a neighboring village. She stated she only returned in the late afternoon to find the body. However, when police cross-referenced this with neighbors, the story fell apart. The villagers described the couple as equally lazy. Since moving into their own home, Zhang Chunliang was rarely seen waking up before 8 or 9 in the morning. Furthermore, they noted that she only accepted light, casual work. Looking at her hands, investigators noticed her fingernails were manicured and clean, hardly the hands of someone who had spent the entire day toiling in the dirt. Suspecting she was lying, detectives brought Zhang Chunliang in for a second. More intense interrogation. The moment they pressed her on the inconsistencies in her alibi, her demeanor cracked. The grieving widow vanished, replaced by a terrified woman caught in a lie. Under pressure, Zhang Chunliang broke down. She admitted she had lied, but not about the murder. She confessed that she had not gone to work that day. Instead, she had left the house around 10 a.m. to meet her lover, a man named Liu Zhili, in the next village. She had fabricated the work story to hide her infidelity, fearing that the revelation of an affair would shame her and complicate her standing in the investigation. This revelation pivoted the investigation again. Now, police had to consider a classic crime of passion scenario. Did Zhang Chunliang and her lover, Liu Zhili, conspire to kill the abusive husband? It would solve two problems at once: freedom for their romance and sole control over Yan's inheritance. Detectives immediately dispatched a unit to Liu Zhili's home. When they arrived, Liu was bewildered. He seemed genuinely confused by the police presence, asking if they had the wrong address. When officers informed him that his lover's husband had been butchered, the color drained from his face. Liu Zhili provided his version of events, which matched Zhang Chunliang's second story perfectly. He stated that she had arrived at his rental room around 10:30 in the morning. They had gone to the market together to buy groceries for lunch. Crucially, Liu's mother, Mrs. Zhang, had visited them and stayed for lunch. She confirmed that Zhang Chunliang did not leave the apartment until late that afternoon. A neighbor in the adjacent rental unit also corroborated their story, stating they had seen the couple and the mother together during the critical window of 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. The alibi was solid. Zhang Chunliang and her lover were cleared of suspicion. The domestic abuse and the affair were messy, but they were not the motive for this murder. The investigators were back to square one. They returned to the victim's social circle, looking for enemies. Yan Tianfeng was a gambler, and in the underworld of high-stakes mahjong and cards, debt is a common motive for violence. Through Yan's drinking buddies, police learned of a conflict with a man named Jin. Jin was 30 years old, a casual acquaintance Yan had met at a casino. Despite not knowing each other well, Jin had loaned Yan a significant sum of money. The debt was 2 months overdue, and Yan had been dodging Jin, avoiding the casino to escape payment. A friend of the victim, a man named Zhang, provided a critical lead. He told police that just 3 days prior, he had run into Jin at the casino. Jin, knowing Zhang was close to Yan, had demanded Yan's home address to collect the debt. Zhang, who had actually received a cut of the loan money himself, felt obligated and gave up the address. Despite Yan's explicit instructions to keep his location secret, Zhang told the police, "I don't know if Jin killed him, but when he asked for that address, his face was terrifying. He looked ready to kill." Armed with this lead, police brought Jin in for questioning. Jin did not deny the conflict. He admitted that 3 days ago, after getting the address from Zhang, he and a friend had stormed Yan's house. Yan's wife, Zhang Chunliang, had been there. At first, Yan tried to hide, but when Jin threatened to harm his wife, Yan came out. However, Jin claimed the story ended there. He told police that the very next day, Yan had miraculously scraped together the cash, borrowing it from his younger brother, and paid the debt in full. Jin argued that since he had his money back, he had no reason to kill the man. Police verified this with Zhang Chunliang, who confirmed that the debt had indeed been settled the day after the confrontation. Jin also provided a verifiable alibi for the time of the murder. Another lead had evaporated. 2 days passed. The murder of Yan Tianfeng remained unsolved, and the pressure on the Luoyang police force was mounting. The killer was still out there. Then, the phone rang again. On October 27th, a woman named Xu Ding called the police, her voice laced with dread. She reported that her neighbor, an elderly woman named Yang Jueyu, appeared to be dead inside her home. The address of the new crime scene sent a chill down the detectives' spines. The house was located just a short walk away from where Yan Tianfeng had been murdered 2 days earlier. Detectives rushed to the scene. Xu Ding explained that she hadn't seen the 71-year-old neighbor for 2 days, which was highly unusual. Feeling uneasy, she had walked over to check on her after returning from the market. The front door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, the house looked dark and silent. Xu Ding had pushed the door open, calling out Mrs. Yang's name. There was no answer. As she stepped deeper into the house, she noticed dark, dried smears on the floor blood. Following the trail to the kitchen, she found Yang Juyu lying face down on the cold floor, motionless. Forensic examination revealed that the elderly woman had been dead for approximately 2 days, placing her time of death roughly in the same window as Yan Tianfeng. She had been stabbed in the neck and the back of the head. The weapon was consistent with the one used in the first murder, a sharp, single-edged blade. Based on the position of the body and the wounds, it appeared the elderly woman had been attacked from behind while she was working in the kitchen. Like the first case, there was no sign of ransacking. In the bedroom, police found a wallet containing cash and a pair of gold earrings sitting in plain sight. This was not a robbery. This, too, was a vendetta. While examining the floor, crime scene technicians found a breakthrough. A partial bloody footprint was discovered near the kitchen, trailing toward the door. It was a large print size, 47. A shoe size of 47 is exceptionally large, particularly for men in that region and generation. This gave the police a specific physical profile. The killer was likely a tall male with large feet. The proximity of the two murders, the timing, the weapon type, and the lack of theft suggested a single perpetrator, but what connected a 43-year-old gambler and a 71-year-old recluse? Police interviewed neighbors about Yang Ju-yu's relationships. They learned that the elderly woman was a scavenger who collected scrap metal for a living. She was deeply unpopular in the village. Neighbors described her as sharp-tongued, bitter, and prone to meddling in other people's family affairs. She had few friends and many enemies. One feud stood out above the rest. Neighbors pointed the police toward a family living less than 300 feet from Yang's house, the Zhang family. The animosity between old Mrs. Yang and the Zhang family was legendary in the village. They had hated each other for decades. However, most villagers dismissed the Zhang family as a threat because the household consisted mostly of women, an elderly mother, a daughter-in-law, and children. But one neighbor whispered a crucial detail the police had missed. The Zhang family did have a son. His name was Zhang Chunliang. He had recently been released from prison and was currently working at a distant coal mine. But, the neighbor added, I think I saw him back in the village a few days ago. Detectives immediately drove to the Zhang residence. When they arrived, they were greeted by the matriarch, an elderly woman named Qiao Ti. When asked about her son, Qiao Tie seemed nervous. She quickly claimed that Zhang Chunliang was not home, stating he had taken her grandson out for a drive early that morning and hadn't returned. The detectives sensed her anxiety. Knowing the history of bad blood between this family and the victim, they pressed for a search of the premises. Qiao Tie reluctantly agreed. As officers swept the yard, they checked the area behind the pig pen. There, hidden awkwardly among the debris, was a knife. The blade was stained with dried, dark red residue. Confronted with the weapon, Qiao Tie and her daughter-in-law panicked, denying any knowledge of the knife or why it was there. They claimed they had never seen it before. As the police were securing the knife, a vehicle pulled up to the house. It was Zhang Chunliang. The officers tensed, hands hovering near their holsters. They approached the man, ready for a violent confrontation. But Zhang Chunliang did not run. He stepped out of the car, his expression unreadably calm. He looked at the police, then at the knife in the evidence bag. "Have you found it?" he asked, his voice steady. When the officer held up the bloodstained knife, Zhang Chunliang didn't flinch. He let out a small, almost relieved laugh. "Yes," he said, "I did it. I killed Yang Zhouyu." Detectives immediately looked down at his feet. He was wearing a pair of worn sneakers. They were large. A quick check confirmed the size, 47. The tread pattern matched the bloody print found in the old woman's kitchen perfectly. Police handcuffed Zhang Chunliang and placed him in the squad car. He was the prime suspect for the murder of the neighbor, and likely the brother-in-law, Yan Tianfeng. Back at the station, the interrogation began. Detectives expected a difficult negotiation, perhaps a denial of the first murder. But Zhang Chunliang was in a talkative mood. He sat in the metal chair, relaxed, looking more like a man catching up with old friends than a suspect facing the death penalty. "I didn't just kill the old woman," Zhang Chunliang said, leaning forward. "And I didn't just kill Yan Tianfeng." The detectives froze. "There is a third one," he said, matter-of-factly. "His name is Liang Xuan. I killed him first." The interrogation room fell into a heavy silence. The detectives exchanged glances, their earlier triumph over solving the neighborhood murders dampened by the sudden introduction of a third name, Liang Xuan. This was a victim they had not yet found, a crime scene they did not know existed. Zhang Chunliang sat across from them, his demeanor unsettlingly calm. He was not confessing with the frantic energy of a man seeking forgiveness, nor was he boasting with the arrogance of a sadist. Instead, he spoke with the weary clarity of a man who had finished a long, difficult job. To understand why 3 people had to die that afternoon, Zhang told the police they first had to understand his life and the woman who defined it. Born in 1966 in a destitute farming village in Luoyang, Zhang Chunliang entered a world of scarcity. He was the second child and the only son in a family of 4 siblings. In rural China during that era, being the only male heir carried a heavy weight of expectation, a burden that landed squarely on his shoulders before he could even walk. Tragedy struck early. When Zhang was not yet 3 years old, his father died of a sudden illness, leaving the family without a patriarch or a primary breadwinner. His mother, a resilient woman named Chow Tai, was left to fend for herself and 4 young children in an unforgiving agrarian society. For the Zhang family, survival became a daily war. Chow Tai worked herself to the bone, taking on menial labor and farming duties that broke the backs of stronger men. Despite her relentless toil, the meager income she scraped together was rarely enough to keep the pantry full. Yet, she was a woman of fierce devotion. Zhang recalled memories of his mother fainting in the rice paddies from exhaustion and hunger, sacrificing her own rations so her children could eat. She endured humiliation and physical pain, driven by a singular hope that her children would survive, find happiness, and perhaps escape the crushing poverty of their birth. Growing up watching his mother's silent suffering, Zhang Chunliang developed a profound, almost worshipful sense of filial piety. He was a quiet, obedient boy who internalized his role as the future pillar of the family. He understood early on that his mother's life was a slow sacrifice made for him. Initially, Zhang believed education was the key. He studied hard, hoping to lift his family out of the mud through academic success. But as he grew older, the economic reality became undeniable. The cost of living was rising, his mother was aging, and his sisters needed support. With a heavy heart, Zhang dropped out of school. He traded his books for a laborer's tools, stepping into the workforce to take the burden off Chow Tai's shoulders. His hard work eventually paid off. By his late 20s, Zhang had managed to save a modest sum of money, enough to improve the family's living conditions. He met a woman from a neighboring village named Xiao Sunday. They fell in love, married, and had a son. For a brief moment, it seemed that Zhang Chunliang had succeeded. He had a stable family, a loving wife, and he was able to provide for his aging mother. But in 1998, the fragile stability of his life was shattered. Zhang was working at a local factory, a job he took seriously. However, the factory environment was toxic, dominated by a man named Zhao Shitian. Zhao was a bully, a man who used his connections with the factory owner to terrorize the other workers. He was lazy, arrogant, and abusive, frequently forcing others to do his share of the labor while he sat back and mocked them. Most workers, fearing for their jobs, swallowed their pride and endured Zhao's abuse. Zhang was no different. He kept his head down, ignoring the taunts, focused only on his paycheck. One afternoon, Zhao Xietian decided to target Zhang. Seeing Zhang working diligently, Zhao began to jeer at him, making snide comments about his desperate need to please the boss. When Zhang ignored him, Zhao escalated. He blocked Zhang's path and began to insult his family. The moment Zhao Shitian called Zhang's mother an uneducated peasant and a low-class woman, something inside Zhang snapped. He could tolerate insults directed at himself, but he could not abide anyone disrespecting the woman who had starved herself to raise him. The red mist descended. Zhang did not just push back, he attacked. Unleashing years of repressed frustration, Zhang beat the bully mercilessly. The assault was severe, leaving Zhao with serious injuries. When the police arrived, the witnesses, his fellow workers who had suffered under Zhao's tyranny, stayed silent. No one spoke up to explain the provocation. In the eyes of the law, Zhang was simply a violent aggressor. The court showed no leniency. Zhang Chunliang was sentenced to 8 years in prison for intentionally causing grievous bodily harm. On top of the prison term, he was ordered to pay a massive compensation fee to the victim, wiping out his family's savings. The guilt was crushing. Before being transferred to the penitentiary, Zhang filed for divorce. He told Xiao Sun that he did not want to drag her and their son down with him. He was a convict now, a disgrace. But Xiao Sun refused to sign the papers. She looked him in the eye and promised to wait. She vowed to take care of his mother, Xiao Tie, until the day he walked free. Her loyalty moved him to tears. For the next 7 years, Zhang was a model prisoner. He followed every rule, worked every shift, and attended every rehabilitation session, driven by the desire to return to the two women who were holding his world together. His good behavior earned him a sentence reduction. In March of 2005, Zhang Chunliang walked out of the prison gates a free man. He was 39 years old, starting over from zero. He returned home to find his wife had kept her promise. His mother was older and frailer, but she was cared for. Zhang was determined to make up for the lost time. He wanted to start a small business, perhaps a shop where he and his wife could work together. But the financial reality was bleak. The compensation payments from his 1998 conviction had left them with nothing. He had friends who offered to help, good men who were willing to lend him money, but Zhang's pride would not allow it. He knew they were struggling too. He refused to be a burden. Instead, he looked for high-paying, labor-intensive work. He found a job at a coal mine, a dangerous profession that paid well for the risk. It was in the darkness of the coal mine that he met Liang Shuiyan. Liang Shuiyan was a co-worker, a smooth-talking man who seemed friendly enough. However, unbeknownst to Zhang, Liang was a degenerate gambler, a man who spent every evening chasing losses at the card tables. Seeing that Zhang was a newcomer, naive, hard-working, and desperate to make friends, Liang targeted him. He approached Zhang one day with a distraught look on his face. He spun a heartbreaking story. His elderly mother was critically ill, dying in a hospital bed, and he needed money for an emergency operation. The story struck Zhang's deepest nerve. Having lost his father early and worshipping his own mother, Zhang could not bear the thought of a son watching his mother die for lack of funds. Despite his own financial precariousness, Zhang scraped together every yuan he had earned since his release. He handed Liang Shuiyan 1,200 yuan, roughly $150. In 2005, in rural Henan, this was a significant amount of money. It represented months of backbreaking labor in the mines. It was the seed money for Zhang's future. But he gave it willingly, believing he was saving a life. It did not take long for the truth to surface. Days later, whispers among the miners reached Zhang's ears. Liang Shuiyan's mother was not sick. She wasn't even in the hospital. Liang had taken Zhang's hard-earned cash straight to the gambling den and lost it all in a single night. The betrayal cut deep. Zhang felt like a fool. He had been exploited, his kindness weaponized against him. He confronted Liang, asking for the money back. Liang stalled. He made excuses. Then, as the days turned into weeks, the excuses turned into hostility. Liang began to avoid him, then openly mock him. Desperate, Zhang lowered himself to beg. He went to Liang's house repeatedly, pleading for the return of the money. He explained that he needed it to support his family, that it was all he had. Liang simply laughed. The more Zhang begged, the more power Liang felt he had. He enjoyed watching the ex-convict grovel. By late October, Zhang's patience had evaporated, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. He looked at his own mother, scavenging for scrap metal in her 70s to help buy rice, and then thought of Liang Shuiyan laughing away his blood money at a card table. On the morning of October 25th, 2005, Zhang Chunliang decided he would not beg anymore. He drove his motorbike to Liang Shuiyan's house, determined to collect the debt one way or another. When he arrived, Liang tried to shut the door in his face, but Zhang forced his way in. Even then, Zhang tried to be civil. He sat down and made one final, emotional appeal. He spoke of his time in prison, his struggle to rebuild, and the pain of watching his mother suffer in poverty. Liang Shuiyan listened with a smirk. He stood up, walked into the back room and returned holding a black plastic bag. He tossed it onto the table in front of Zhang. "Here," Liang said. "Take it." Zhang's heart leaped, thinking Liang had finally gathered the cash. He opened the bag. Inside, there was no money. It was filled with household trash, rotten food scraps, and dirt. Zhang stared at the garbage, his mind going blank. Liang Xuan burst into laughter. "You really are stupid," Liang sneered. "I don't owe you anything. You have no proof, no contract. You're just an idiot ex-con who gives away his money." Zhang stood up to leave, his hands trembling, his dignity in tatters. But Liang was not finished. He wanted to twist the knife. "Leaving so soon?" Liang taunted. "You know, while you're slaving away in that mine, your wife is all alone. Maybe I should pay her a visit. She's a pretty woman. I'll make sure to take good care of her." The threat against his wife was the spark. The insult to his intelligence was the fuel. But it was the image of the black plastic bag the garbage offered in exchange for his family's survival that caused the explosion. Zhang Chunliang's vision tunneled. He saw a fruit knife sitting on a nearby table. Without a word, he lunged. He grabbed the knife and drove it into Liang Xuan's chest. The gambler's laughter died in his throat, replaced by a gurgle of shock. Zhang didn't stop. He stabbed him again and again, venting the humiliation of the past months with every thrust. Liang Xuan collapsed onto the floor, bleeding out within seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. Breathing heavily, Zhang stood over the body. He felt no remorse. In his mind, the debt had been paid in blood. He began to rummage through the dead man's house. He did not take the television or any valuables. He searched until he found a stash of cash. He counted out exactly 1,200 yuan. He put the money in his pocket, just the principal, no interest, and walked out the door. He climbed onto his motorbike and began the long ride back to his own village. The wind whipped against his face, cooling the sweat on his brow. As the adrenaline faded, a dark clarity settled over him. He knew the law. He had a prior record. A violent recidivist who committed murder shortly after release would face only one outcome: the death penalty. His life, effectively, was over. He was a dead man walking. As the kilometers rolled by, Zhang Chunliang's mind began to work through a terrible logic. If he was going to die anyway, if he was going to be executed, then he had nothing left to lose. And if he had nothing left to lose, why should he leave his enemies behind to torment his family after he was gone? He thought of his mother, Xiao Ti. He thought of the people who had bullied her, hurt her, and made her life miserable while he was powerless to stop them. He realized he had a list. Liang Xuan was just the beginning. There were 2 other names etched into his memory. 2 other people who deserved to die before he turned himself in. He gripped the handlebars tighter. He wasn't going to the police station yet. He was going home. The executioner had work to do. As the engine of his motorbike roared beneath him, cutting through the rural wind of Henan province, Zhang Chunliang felt a strange, icy clarity settle over his mind. The murder of Liang Xuan had been an explosion of rage, a frantic reaction to immediate humiliation. But as the kilometers disappeared under his wheels, that hot, chaotic anger cooled into a solid, heavy resolve. He ran the calculations in his head with the cold logic of an accountant. He had just killed a man. He was a recidivist, a man with a violent criminal record who had been out of prison for less than a year. In the strict eyes of the Chinese legal system, there would be no leniency. There would be no second chance. He was already a dead man. The police would find him, the court would sentence him, and eventually, a bullet would end him. The realization did not terrify him. Instead, it liberated him. If he was destined to die, the consequences of his actions no longer mattered. The laws of man no longer applied to him. But one thought gnawed at him, tightening his chest even as he accepted his own fate: his mother. For his entire life, his mother, Xiao Tie, had been the victim of the world. She had been bullied, starved, beaten, and humiliated. first by poverty, and then by the cruel people who surrounded them. Zhang had always tried to be her shield, but if he was executed, who would protect her? Who would stand between her and the wolves when he was gone? A dark epiphany took root in his mind. If he was going to leave this world, he had a duty to clean it up first. He had to remove the threats. He had to make sure that when he was gone, no one would dare to hurt the women he loved. The list in his mind had 2 names left on it. The first name was family. It was his own brother-in-law, Yan Tianfeng. To the outside world, the hatred between Zhang and Yan might have seemed like a petty family squabble, but to Zhang, it was a festering wound that had never healed. Yan Tianfeng was married to Zhang's older sister, but he treated the Zhang family not as relatives, but as burdens. Yan was comfortable financially, living off a substantial inheritance left by his own parents. He never had to toil in the fields or sweat in the mines. Yet, despite his wealth, he was a miser of the worst kind. Zhang recalled the years he spent in prison, the years he was helpless to intervene. During that time, his mother, Qiao Tie, was already in her late 60s. To help feed Zhang's sisters and keep the household running, the old woman wandered the village streets daily, scavenging for scrap metal and cardboard to sell for pennies. It was humiliating work, but she did it with dignity. Yan Tianfeng, however, saw her poverty as a nuisance. He never offered her a single yuan of support. Worse, he actively poisoned his wife's mind, encouraging Zhang's sister to go back to her mother's house, not to help, but to demand a share of the family's meager property. But the incident that sealed Yan's fate, the memory that made Zhang grip the handlebars until his knuckles turned white, had occurred a few years prior. One afternoon, Qiao Tie had been scavenging near Yan's house. She found a discarded item near a trash bin and picked it up, intending to sell it. Yan Tianfeng saw her. Instead of greeting his mother-in-law, he accused her of theft. He claimed she was stealing from his property. The old woman tried to explain that she had found it in the trash, but Yan would not listen. He began to scream at her, cursing her in front of the neighbors. When she tried to walk away, he shoved her. The frail woman fell hard onto the concrete, striking her head. Blood began to pour from the wound, matting her gray hair. Yan Tianfeng did not call an ambulance. He did not help her up. He stood over her, berating her for being clumsy. He refused to pay for a doctor, terrified that spending money on her medical bills would eat into his inheritance. Qiao Tai had to be bandaged at home, suffering through the pain in silence. When Zhang heard this story, he was locked in a prison cell, powerless to protect her. The image of his mother bleeding on the ground, while his wealthy brother-in-law counted his pennies, had haunted his nightmares for years. Now, he had the power to balance the scales. Zhang arrived back in the village of Yonglin in the early afternoon. He did not go home to see his wife or mother yet. He drove straight to Yan Tianfeng's house. He parked his bike some distance away and walked to the front gate. It was quiet. The village was deep in its afternoon slumber. As he approached, he saw that the front door was wide open, just as Yan's wife had later described to the police. Yan was arrogant and careless, believing he was untouchable in his own home. Zhang stepped across the threshold. The house was cool and dim. In the center of the living room, Yan Tianfeng was asleep on a hammock, snoring softly. He looked peaceful, completely unaware that his judgment day had arrived. Zhang did not wake him. He did not offer a final speech or a chance for redemption. Yan did not deserve the dignity of a duel. Zhang drew the same knife he had used to kill Liang Shuwen, the blade still carrying the dried blood of the first sinner, and stepped up to the hammock. With a swift, brutal motion, he plunged the knife into Yan's abdomen. Yan's eyes may have flown open, but he could not scream. The shock was instantaneous. Zhang stabbed him a second time, and then a third. The blood sprayed onto the wall, painting a violent abstract mural of vengeance. The blood soaked into the hammock, dripping steadily onto the cement floor with a rhythmic tapping sound. Yan Tianfeng died without ever lifting a finger in his own defense. Zhang stood back, watching the life drain from the man who had let his mother bleed. He felt no guilt. He felt only a grim satisfaction. The parasite was gone. His mother would never be humiliated by this man again. But the work was not finished. There was one more name. He wiped the blade on his trousers and walked out of the house, leaving the door open just as he had found it. He moved through the village like a ghost, unnoticed by the few neighbors who were awake. His destination was less than 300 feet away. The final target was Yang Juyu, the 71-year-old neighbor living alone. To a stranger, killing an elderly woman might seem like the act of a monster, but in Zhang Chunliang's narrative, Yang Juyu was a demon who had tormented his family for decades. In rural Chinese culture, reputation is everything. A person's face, their social standing, is worth more than gold. And for 30 years, Yang Juyu had made it her mission to destroy the Zhang family's reputation. The feud began when Zhang was just a toddler. Yang was a sharp-tongued, bitter woman who delighted in the misfortune of others. When Zhang's father died young, leaving Qiao Tie a widow, Yang did not offer sympathy. Instead, she spread a vicious superstition throughout the village. She told everyone that Qiao Tie had the Keifu destiny, a husband-killing fate. She claimed Qiao Tie was cursed, a black widow who brought death to the men she loved. This label was devastating in a traditional village. It isolated the young widow, making her a pariah. But Yang did not stop there. As Qiao Tai struggled to raise her children alone, Yang whispered poison into the ears of the neighbors. She fabricated stories that Qiao Tie was having illicit affairs with other men while her husband was dying on his sickbed. She accused the grieving widow of infidelity, the ultimate sin for a woman of that era. These rumors crushed Qiao Tie. She was so ashamed, so fearful of the judging eyes of the village, that for a long time she refused to leave her house. She cried in secret, her reputation shredded by the lies of the woman next door. Even decades later, the malice continued. Just recently, Zhang had caught Yang Juyu throwing her household garbage over the fence into his yard. It was a petty, spiteful act, a reminder that she still looked down on them as trash. When Zhang had politely asked her to stop, she had sneered at him. She had spent a lifetime using her words as weapons. Now, Zhang would use a real weapon to silence her forever. It was roughly 3 p.m. The sky was overcast, hinting at the rain that would come later that night. Zhang walked to Yang Juyu's house. Like Yan, she had left her door unlatched. He pushed it open. The house was cluttered, filled with the scraps she collected. He heard movement in the kitchen. He walked softly down the hallway, his large size 47 shoes leaving faint, dusty prints on the floor, the very prints that would later lead the police to his door. He found Yang Juyu standing by the stove, her back to him. She was small, frail, shrunken by age. But Zhang did not see a helpless grandmother. He saw the woman who had made his mother cry, the woman who had cursed his family before he could even understand what the words meant. He stepped forward. She must have heard him at the last second, perhaps sensing the shift in the air. But it was too late. Zhang attacked her from behind. He struck quickly, aiming for the neck and the back of the head. Yang Juyu collapsed onto the kitchen floor. The silence returned to the house, heavy and absolute. It was done. The list was complete. Zhang Chunliang stood in the kitchen for a moment, breathing in the scent of old dust and fresh blood. He felt a profound sense of lightness. The 3 people who had caused him and his family the most pain were gone. He had burned his own future to the ground to clear the path for his mother. He left the house, closing the door behind him. He walked back to his own home, which was just a stone's throw away. When he entered, his family was there. His mother, Qiao Tie, looked up at him. She did not know that her son had just slaughtered 3 people. She did not know that he was covered in the invisible stain of murder. Zhang acted as if it were a normal day. He washed his hands. He spoke to his wife. He played with his son. He sat down and drank tea. Inside, he was waiting. He knew the police would come. He had been sloppy, he had left footprints, he had been seen entering the village, and he had killed people with obvious connections to him. It was only a matter of time. Initially, he considered turning himself in immediately. It would be the honorable thing to do. But as he looked at his mother's face, lined with age and hardship, he hesitated. He knew this would be the last time he would ever see her as a free man. Once he walked into that police station, he would never come home. He wanted one more evening, one last dinner, one last night to sleep under the same roof as the woman he had killed for. So, he waited. When the police finally arrived at his door 2 days later, after finding the knife behind the pig pen, Zhang Chunliang did not feel fear. When he saw the officers, he smiled. It was the smile of a man who had completed his life's work. "Have you found it?" he had asked them. Back in the interrogation room, the detectives stared at him in disbelief. They had expected a monster, a raving lunatic. Instead, they found a man who spoke of triple homicide as if it were a necessary household chore. "I regret it," Zhang told them, his voice soft. "But only a little bit. I know what I did was against the law. I know I will die. But they pushed me. They pushed my family. I had no other choice." The detectives recorded every word. The case was closed. The killer had confessed. But as the story spread from the police station to the public, the tragedy of Zhang Chunliang was just beginning to ignite a firestorm of public opinion. The arrest of Zhang Chunliang sent shockwaves through the quiet hamlets of Luoyang, but it was his behavior in the aftermath that turned a gruesome triple homicide into a national morality play. As news of the Filial son killer spread, the courtroom in Henan province became the stage for a tragic finale that blurred the lines between villainy and heroism, justice and vengeance. When the trial began, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The gallery was packed, not just with the grieving families of the victims, but with curious onlookers and reporters drawn by the sensational nature of the crimes. They expected to see a monster, a man who had butchered 3 people in a single afternoon with the cold efficiency of a slaughterhouse worker. They expected a man who would scream his innocence or beg for his life. Instead, they saw Zhang Chunliang. He stood in the defendant's dock with his head held high, his expression calm and resigned. He looked less like a mass murderer and more like a man who had simply finished a long, arduous shift at work. Throughout the proceedings, Zhang did not deny a single charge. He did not try to plead insanity. He did not blame alcohol or a momentary lapse of judgment. When the prosecutor laid out the forensic evidence, the bloody size 47 footprints, the knife found behind the pig pen, the graphic autopsy photos of his brother-in-law, and the elderly neighbor Zhang simply nodded. "I did it," he told the court, his voice steady. "I killed them all." His defense attorney attempted to contextualize the crimes, painting a picture of a man pushed to the absolute brink by a lifetime of poverty, bullying, and systemic humiliation. The defense argued that Zhang was not a psychopath, but a desperate son who had snapped under the weight of watching his mother suffer. They brought up the debt that Liang Xuan had refused to pay. They detailed the years of emotional and physical abuse Yan Tianfeng had inflicted on Zhang's mother. They recounted the decades of malicious rumors spread by Yang Zhuyu. However, Zhang Chunliang himself seemed uninterested in these mitigating factors. When given the chance to speak, he offered a chillingly pragmatic justification for his actions. He told the judge that while he regretted the necessity of the violence, he did not regret the outcome. In his mind, he had not committed murder. He had performed an extermination. He had removed the pests that were eating away at his family's happiness. "They were all at fault," Zhang stated to the stunned courtroom. "I have no future, but now my mother can live in peace." The judicial system, however, operates on law, not vigilante morality. The brutality of the crimes, 3 victims, stabbed multiple times, with no chance of defense, left the judge with little room for leniency. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. The gavel fell with a final, echoing thud. Zhang Chunliang was found guilty of intentional homicide. The sentence was death. In the Chinese court system, a death sentence usually triggers a frantic emotional collapse from the defendant's screams for mercy, fainting spells, or violent outbursts. Zhang Chunliang did none of these things. He smiled. It was a small, sad smile, one of acceptance. He declined his right to appeal. He told the court that he was ready to pay for his crimes with his life. But before the guards could drag him away, the proceedings took a turn that would be etched into the memories of everyone present. Zhang Chunliang turned away from the judge and looked toward the gallery, where his weeping mother, Xiao Tie, and his wife, Xiao Sun, were sitting. The stoic killer crumbled. Tears began to stream down his face, washing away the calm mask he had worn since his arrest. In a scene of profound cultural weight, Zhang dropped to his knees on the hard floor of the courtroom. The sound of his knees hitting the wood echoed in the silence. He performed the kowtow, prostrating himself before his elderly mother, touching his forehead to the ground in the ultimate gesture of submission, apology, and respect. "Mother," he choked out, "I cannot serve you anymore. I have been an unfilial son. I am leaving you behind." The courtroom erupted in sobs. Even the bailiff seemed moved. Zhang then turned his gaze to his wife, Xiao Sun, the woman who had waited for him through 7 years of prison and was now about to become a widow. "Please," he begged her, his voice cracking with emotion. "Take care of my mother, that is all I ask. If you do this for me, I can die in peace." Xiao Sun, tears streaming down her face, nodded. She promised she would protect Xiao Ti until the end of her days. Having secured this final vow, Zhang Chunliang wiped his face, stood up, and allowed the guards to shackle him. He walked out of the courtroom to await his execution, leaving behind a stunned audience. The story of Zhang Chunliang did not end with the verdict. As details of the trial leaked to the press and the nascent internet forums of 2005, a strange phenomenon occurred. Public opinion began to fracture. Usually, a triple murderer is universally reviled. But Zhang Chunliang became a polarizing figure. On one side stood the staunch legalists and the families of the victims, who correctly pointed out that murder is never the answer to a dispute over money or insults. They argued that Zhang was a violent, dangerous man who had slaughtered an old woman and his own family member in cold blood. To them, his filial piety was just an excuse for savage rage. On the other side, however, a wave of sympathy swelled for the condemned man. Many people in rural China who understood the crushing weight of poverty and the importance of family reputation saw a reflection of their own struggles in Zhang's story. They dubbed him the filial assassin. They argued that the legal system had failed him long before he picked up the knife. When Liang Shuiyan stole his money, the police could not help him. When his brother-in-law beat his mother, society did nothing. When the neighbors slandered his family, there was no recourse. In the eyes of his supporters, Zhang was a tragic hero who had sacrificed his own life to restore dignity to his mother. He was wrong, they admitted, but he was understandably wrong. The debate raged in newspapers and tea shops. Was he a cold-blooded killer or a victim of a cruel society that pushed him too far? While the public debated his morality, Zhang Chunliang sat in his death row cell, counting down his final days. He remained a model prisoner until the very end. He spent his time writing letters to his family, urging his son to study hard and never follow in his father's footsteps. As the execution date approached, Zhang made one final request. It was a request that surprised the prison officials and further cemented his complex legacy. He asked to sign an organ donation form. "I have taken lives," he told the warden. "My body is healthy. If I am going to die, I want my organs to be used to save someone else. Maybe, in this way, I can pay back a little of the debt I owe to the world." It was his last attempt at redemption. On June 19, 2006, just 8 months after the murders, Zhang Chunliang was led out of his cell for the final time. The process was swift and clinical. He was taken to the execution ground, a designated site on the outskirts of the city. He did not struggle. He did not scream. As he knelt on the ground, waiting for the end, witnesses reported that he looked calm. He had settled his debts. He had secured his mother's future. He had offered his body to science. In his twisted logic, he had balanced the ledger. The sharp crack of a rifle shot rang out, ending the life of Zhang Chunliang. He was 40 years old. The aftermath of the case left a scar on the community. The Zhang family was left shattered. A mother grieving the son who had killed for her. A wife widowed by her husband's vengeance. The families of the victims Yan Tianfeng, Yang Juyu, and Liang Xuan. The case of the filial son killer remains one of the most debated true crime stories in modern Chinese history. It serves as a grim reminder of what happens when the pressure of poverty collides with the fierce, unyielding obligations of family loyalty. Zhang Chunliang was a man who loved his mother so much that he became a monster to protect her. He believed that by destroying the people who hurt her, he was fulfilling his duty as a son. But in doing so, he destroyed himself and left behind a legacy of blood and tears. Some say he was a victim of circumstance, a good man driven mad by a cruel world. Others say he was a violent narcissist who valued his own pride over human life. Perhaps he was both. In the end, there were no winners in the village of Yonglin. Only 3 graves, a grieving mother, and a cautionary tale about the terrifying lengths a son will go to for love. And that brings us to the end of this tragic saga. The case of Zhang Chunliang forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about justice and morality. It is easy to condemn a murderer, but it is harder to look at the broken system that created him. What do you think? Was Zhang Chunliang a cold-blooded monster who deserved the death penalty, or was he a desperate son pushed past his breaking point? Does his love for his mother justify his crimes in any way, or is murder simply unforgivable, regardless of the motive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more investigations into the darkest corners of criminal psychology. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.